I want to kick off our conversation today by talking a little bit about the specific design considerations around single-use technologies. So, Eric, why don't we start with you? What do you
All
think
right.
are the most important factors to be mindful of when designing process and systems for single use?
I think from the actual process system, the single-use component part, I mean, one of the big challenges is always thinking through connections, particularly a lot of these things around sampling. You know, in a stainless steel facility, you think about that, you kind of build that in, and you can build flexibility, and you work with that. Everything kind of ends in a tri clamp. In the single-use world, it seems like every bag, every time we get a tubing set, it's different. Every process has got one little tweak different, which then creates other problems in terms of now you have lots of SKUs to manage. So that's always a big consideration when you're thinking about the single use at the process level.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess why would you or why would anybody advocate for single use? How does it benefit a process and facility operations? And to kind of dovetail some more in there, does size and scale matter? How does that affect
Oh,
decisions?
absolutely. Size and scale matters enormously. If you look at what's going on now with the GLP-1s, there's a resurgence in building large stainless steel facilities because of the scale that they're looking to manufacture. It just makes more sense when you're talking about you know tens of thousands of liters of reactor capacity that you're looking at a stainless steel facility. When you start getting down 2,000, 3,000 range, then it starts making more sense that, okay, now I have to actually sit down and do the evaluation for my particular product, for my particular facility. Does this make sense or not? And what you see a lot of times is in the world of multi-product manufacturing in one facility, there may be a good case for single use, even at those kind of larger end of the ranges. I mean, there are single use bioreactors now up to 5,000 liters from a technology standpoint. But if you need to figure out if that's the fit for your facility and for the process slate that you're looking at.
Yeah, thank you. Um, and also, I'm curious what unique challenges you think come with designing a facility that's primarily being designed for single use, as well as some of the common pitfalls you've seen, or maybe some oversights that uh, facilities that try to incorporate single use systems fall into. How can they be avoided?
Um, well, one of the things I always think it always gets people, particularly as we start getting to these larger single use bioreactors, is they get to be rather tall. Uh, and unlike some of the larger stainless steel facilities where we've taken these large bioreactors, we've put them into gray space, or we divide them across floors, it's really hard to do that with a single use bioreactor and still have all the access that you need to in order to set it up. So if you're looking at those larger sizes, you're going to have some very high ceiling heights in your clean room to deal with. That a lot of times people think, oh, it's a single use facility, it doesn't need as much. But those types of things can sneak up on you. Particularly, it's winds up being one of those situations a lot of times where things are successful, things are going well, or another process comes in, and then like, hey, well, we've already been running this facility, single use facility. Can we just put a little larger bioreactor in there? And you may run into issues with height. Um, Obviously, building for single use, we're going to make some big changes to the utilities. Drains are always something that's very different between a single use facility and a stainless steel facility. Stainless steel facility, a lot of times I can have things piped away, whereas in a single use facility, I'm having open drains of some sort, or otherwise managing opening and closing of the drains in the room. And it's one of those nuances that you have to think through quite a bit, how you're going to do that, how you're going to operate it, because it can become one of those gotcha moments at the end when you go to do it, and like, all right, now because I put this valve in here, my drain is now a foot off the ground. Okay, how am I going to get everything in there? I need to transfer to another bag. I need to pump everything down the drain. And there's plenty of facilities that have encountered that and lived that challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Right. Yeah, the five, like we're limited out now to about 5 liters in terms of 5,000 liters in terms of the size of these single-use bioreactors. And if you see them and you watch them get put together in the can, I'll call it, or the vessel that it's erected in, it's about 15 foot off the ground, depending upon the sample ports, the takeoffs, or whatever you might be doing, as well as the stirring systems, the mixing systems. You're wind up building a structure in and around it. So it becomes a big deal. On the other side, as Eric said about drains and stuff like that, there's the connections to sample lines, ports, getting drains, getting materials in, getting pumping media in there, pumping the cell culture. There becomes a little bit of a spatial consideration when you start putting these things together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because yeah, 15 foot in the air, and guess what? You still need to get to the top of the thing to plug in the heaters for the vent filters. But yet, I'm still dealing with stuff in the intermediate range, and even on the smaller ones, even on a 500 liter reactor, you think, oh, not a big deal. It's not that tall. But then again, when you start having to deal with all the little things at the top of it, now you're realizing I'm gonna have to bring in a rolling stair or something else like that, and then that just starts chewing up space. It becomes extra complex.
And then you're
Setup
connecting up.
operation.
Yeah, and you're connecting up tubes because you may have a mass spec or atomic absorption that's looking at the off gases that are coming from there. Where do you position that? How do you position that? How do you get? It's a good thing, but you have to basically look at a mock-up and you have to design in and around it and understand the whole spatial issues associated with it. But you eliminate the CIP, you eliminate the SIP, you eliminate a lot of issues that you would have to deal with if you had a stainless steel reactor.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you guys is it's the size factor matters.
Size matters.
It's probably much harder to go back and retrofit a facility than it is to plan from the offset about single use and
Absolutely.
everything with height.
Absolutely.
That's something I never heard or thought about before. So thank you guys.
And on the other hand, if you look at the opposite end, you look for 1 liter C train build up to 200, 500, even 1,000 liters. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy, and you can fit it into most facilities. And you could do a retrofit easier, with the smaller end. But if you're doing the GLP-1s like Eric mentioned, or you're looking at vaccines, look at the seasonal flu vaccine. You're turning out 15,000, 20,000 liter size batches. It becomes you could use it for the C train up to 200, maybe 500,000 liters, but after that it's a completely different story. And even at the 5,000 liter size, if you want to have, it becomes you have to design complete for it. And it's not only just the process, but it's the spatial relationships and Fred will talk about in terms of how you build in and around that.
Yeah. I'm curious too, before we move on here, I'm curious in your experience of single use, are there any unique considerations when it comes to validating a single use that, folks might not think about or that might fly in the face of traditional stainless facility validation?
The one of the big things that people always push is you don't have to go through cleaning validation. If it's truly 100% single use system, but it's hard sometimes to get that 100% single use system. Sometimes you have, I have this UV cell that, I mean, at $5,000 I could make it single use or captive, but maybe I don't want to do that. I'm going to have to reuse that. I'm going to have to wash that. So then I have a little bit of cleaning validation. It still reduces it in what I need to do, but it doesn't completely eliminate it in a lot of cases. There are some processes where you can really if you're the innovator, you can drive those things to get to 100% single-use process. If you're a CDMO, you're getting what you get. So you will probably have to deal with some offline cleaning of small parts. And kind of, where I kind of hearing a little bit what Herman was saying, another big opportunity, hybrid facilities. And there's still a lot of that out there where whether it's a C train or maybe it's even just a step within a larger stainless steel facility where it makes more economical sense to run it as a single use system and rather than having it as a stainless steel system in filtration or in downstream purification.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Thank you.
big issue would be buffers. Perfect example of buffers. You know, you have the main bioreactor, whatever size it is. But how are we going to produce all our buffers? Are we going to be dumping salt and making salt water and pushing it through, and through reactors, and then you're going to have to clean through tanks and then have to clean them? You know, single-use systems now gives us a lot easier to go ahead and make those and then use them and throw it away and don't have to wash the tank and all the transfer lines. You think about all the matrix of the transfer lines, and then you could take it to one step further, is you could buy single-use buffers and just wheel them right up, plug them in, and go from there, as opposed to having to have a bunch of stainless steel facilities attached to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not gonna leave the buffer thing alone, particularly with the discussion we were having earlier before the call, before this, talking about supply chain issues with the current situation. There's still a place to make up buffer in stainless steel on site. Whether you put that into a tote yourself and push it across to a room, rather to eliminate some of the transfer lines and the cleaning aspect. Again, cleaning validation of a buffer tank is pretty easy and straightforward. Very little risk there. So you can still do that, and you can actually, particularly if you're a large buffer user, that's a good way to mitigate some of that supply chain risk and to keep your costs down.
Okay.
On a reoccurring basis, your operating cost.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I don't want to interrupt. Thank you. Before we move on, I did want to answer this question I saw coming from Charles. He asks, is there a 3D modeling tool that can be used to plan the space utilization of single-use equipment and all attachments that can be used by manufacturing plant staff? And while you guys answer that, Miles, would you mind putting up our first poll question for the audience, please?
Yeah, that's one for Fred and Eric, that question.
Okay.
Theoretically, you can get the 3D models of all these systems, incorporate them into a Revit model, and then do walkthroughs around it. Getting every single item, every possible opportunity, and then there always seems to be something lost in terms of how do you work with the system that is not captured in a lot of these 3D modeling tools, and it's best captured by doing a demo of the equipment. Fred, do you have a different thought?
No, I mean, I think, the beauty of Revit is that you can definitely model a lot of different, process equipment. And I think as single-use technology gets more and more in the mainstream, those tools, that equipment will become, more readily available to be able to model, whether it's a new facility or whether it's a retrofit. I think that's definitely it's real, and it's you're able to use those tools immediately in the early planning stages of a facility, renovation or a new facility. So I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the challenge sometimes with when you get the Revit models from the manufacturer, from the vendor, is that they're generic. They're not your particular tubing set, your particular bag. And I have heard from those people and others in that single-use supply space that they're looking at this is an application where they're trying to use AI to kind of get behind the scenes and do a lot of that grunt work of generating very specific models for people, rather than just relying on the generic ones.
Charles also says, please mention that Revit is not available to use by plant staff.
Yeah, you don't want them in Revit, absolutely. No, but what you can do is you can, and we've done this on a lot of our projects, is we bring it into Autodesk Construction, and then anybody who has a license to get into that Autodesk Construction Cloud, and we at United Therapeutics, we invite our maintenance staff into those sessions so that they can go into the model, which is still a challenge for a lot of them. But most of the time, when we're in the design phase, we're actually forcing 3D model reviews, walking through areas to try to capture a lot of those things.
And also be aware when you do these 3D models, also see if you can figure out how you get at certain things, how you get at filters, how you get at, anything that's bolted around in and around that. And then how do you clean that stuff? Because you put this whole big monstrosity together, you got the 5-liter reactor, whatever you might have, and how do you get at the ceiling? How do you clean it? How do you get a crane in there if you have to pull something? So there's a lot of considerations that are, not just it's going to be in there and it's going to be beautiful and wonderful. There's going to be some stuff that's going to have to work in and around it for basic maintenance.
Yeah. Thank you. In the interest of, oops, sorry, Fred, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's a very good point. Maintenance access is critical around whether it's, fixed equipment or whether it's around, single-use, reactors. You've got to get to the tubing and the piping and the filters and the valves, and be able to pull the bags out and all of that. So you have to take all of that into consideration in the front end planning of a facility. Yeah. So
we have a facility with a 1,000-liter stainless steel tank with a swing hatch on top that's about 18 inches, but the ceiling above it's 12 inches. So guess what? They could never open up the swing hatch to go inside and inspect the vessel.
Always plan for maintenance, folks.
Yeah, well, Fred actually hit on a good point that people miss quite a bit with single-use facilities, is the waste out flows. Those bioreactors, when they come packaged, they're relatively compact. After you use them, they do not go back down to that same size. So you have to envision dealing with, if you have a 5,000-liter bioreactor, you're going to have a very large, cumbersome bag and tubing set to somehow package up, contain before you move out of the suite.
Yeah, especially if you're moving anything that's BSL 1, 2, or 3, and you got to wrap it, you got to seal it, and you're going to need a forklift to go in and take it out because of the weight. You're not going to be,
but they have other movers that are better than a forklift for that sort of thing.
You're going to have some kind of material. You're right, Eric. Some kind of material movement that's going to have wheels and a motor, and you're going to have to get it in through the material airlock, out of the material airlock. It's there's a whole path associated with that, and operators to basically do that. And you also got to make sure your path is clean when you remove the waste after you're done.
All great considerations.
That all has to be taken into account in the initial planning stages as far as the different flows, especially for single use. Waste flows is a very critical flow. Take into consideration and analyze, and it may not be advisable to mix waste flows with other flows. You may wind up with a dedicated path taking that single use waste out that doesn't interfere with other flows.